He won the war and now the presidential elections. But can Sri Lanka's Mahinda Rajapakse deliver on his promises? And how will he address all the countless post-Civil War challenges? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. Elected for a second term as president, Mahinda Rajapakse has been declared the winner of the Sri Lankan presidential elections by the state media. Several people were killed during the campaign in the run-up to the vote, but on the day there was less violence than many had been anticipating. But as Bethan Howe reports, some are saying the elections weren't entirely free and fair.
Celebrating Sri Lanka's first democratic election since the end of the Civil War. State media reported incumbent President Mahinda Rajapakse won with almost 2 million more votes than his opposition. Turnout was high, with up to 70% of the electorate voting. The president ran his campaign on the strength of a bloody military assault against the Tamil Tigers that ended in May last year. The assault was led by General SARATH FONSEKA, the opposition candidate in this election. He also campaigned, claiming his part in ending a quarter of a century of civil war. But before the election, General FONSEKA was claiming unfair treatment and that the media was giving blanket coverage to the president and virtually none to him.
Prior to election, nobody is supposed to canvass, or candidates are not supposed to do any propaganda by use of media, electronic or print, but the government is ignoring totally these rules and regulations, and government media is being abused, and they are continuing with the normal propaganda.
But the Sri Lankan foreign minister disagrees with General FONSEKA's concerns.
That this election is one of those free and fair elections, but a democracy could be happier.
The voting itself went off relatively calmly, but there were explosions in the Tamil-populated north, with 6 in the city of Jaffna as the polls opened. There were several more near the camps for people displaced by the war, and grenade attacks in the centre and south of the country. Both candidates' campaigns had claimed violence was being used to dissuade people from voting for them.
I am of the opinion that they are making attempts to use the force to take us into custody, or maybe to push us into an ineffective position where the government can make use of the military to rule the country.
And his prediction may have been valid. In the hours after the result was broadcast, the hotel General FONSEKA was staying in was steadily surrounded by soldiers. But again, the foreign minister denied there was anything untoward about the military presence.
The government should be magnanimous in victory, and that's what the government is all about. That's what President Rajapakse's leadership is all about. He has been maintaining that line, and there is no harassment that of any opposition member or a candidate, or for that matter an opposition leader from any political party.
Some of General FONSEKA's supporters are now being accused of the serious crime of deserting the army. The general himself has declared that he will not accept the election result. So, although the polls may have gone relatively smoothly, there may yet be further unrest for Sri Lanka. Bethan Howe, Inside Story.
Joining me to discuss this on the programme today, well, from Colombo, we have Ananth Palakidnar, Deputy Editor of News at Sri Lanka's Sunday Observer. In London, we're joined by Councillor Thea Idekadar and Jonathan Spencer, Professor of Anthropology of South Asia at the University of Edinburgh, joins me from the Scottish capital. Gentlemen, welcome to Inside Story. Jonathan Spencer, could I begin with you? There's a wonderful phrase used in the English language that it's not over until the fat lady sings. Well, there's no fat lady singing here, but rather 2 portly men. I just wondered, is the battle for political power over, or do you think FONSEKA will remain a thorn in the side of Rajapakse?
Well, it's extremely difficult to predict what's going to happen in the next half hour, let alone the next month or the next year in Sri Lankan politics. It's been a truly bizarre 24 hours we've just been through, with the reports of soldiers outside FONSEKA's hotel. Clearly there will be legal challenges. Whether the legal challenges simply disappear into Sri Lanka's tortuously slow legal system, or whether you get something more like the situation that developed in Iran, where an opposition that feels it's been robbed of a result actually takes to the streets is unclear. I think it's more likely to be the former than the latter.
Mr. Thea Idekada in the UK also, what do you make of this? Do you think Mr. Fonseca will be a thorn in the side of Rajapaksa? You yourself are a Tamil, sir.
Well, I think it is very difficult, as the earlier speaker said, what is going to happen. Mr. Fonseca has no way out now. He's lost the election. He was never going to win right from the beginning anyway, because he has absolutely no political experience whatsoever before he came to the elections. And even if he had won, how he could have worked with the UNP and the JVP is unthinkable. They are two opposing parties in one holy union. Could not work. This is a holy, unholy alliance, would have never worked. So it is very difficult. Rajapaksa has won the election. Yes, there has been disturbances and there had been bombs going on, but given the majority that he has, even without those incidents, one has to presume that he would have won the elections anyway.
Okay.
But the problem is now whether he can manage the country.
Indeed. Ananth Palakidnar, you're on the ground there in Colombo, sir. I suppose a lot of political soul searching for Mr. Fonseca's party. The election proceeded peacefully, and as we said, in most parts it was pretty peaceful. Few voting irregularities according to the Election Commission. But would a graceful acceptance of the result by Fonseca mean that he too could have the potential to run again for the presidency?
Well, here some of the political analysts say that he jumped the gun. He tried to be the Ike of Sri Lanka, Great Eisenhower, but it is too early for him. It is, he tried to sort of capitalize from the war victory, but it's backfired now, we can see. But whereas President Mahinda Rajapaksa is coming from a very big political dynasty. His father is one of the senior politicians who has established the opposition party in Sri Lanka. So he had he has a very long history with regard to the Sri Lankan politics. He is there in the parliament, and now he's president for 40 years. So it is very difficult for him to challenge President Mahinda Rajapaksa. He challenged, and we can understand what really had happened, Sure. And on the other hand, I won't say that SARATH Fonseka was on his own. He came to this contest or anything. He was pushed to this contest. Earlier, the opposition was making him as a hero to contest in this election with Mahinda Rajapaksa. So he had chosen a very wrong person. Now, I think he's now he would have learned a lesson from this election where he stands and all.
Most certainly had his arm twisted maybe to enter the competition. We've got a general broad idea now of where we stand. Let's look to the future to a certain extent and the challenges that are faced by Sri Lanka, because President Mahinda Rajapaksa sought his second term by advocating more development and jobs. Now, can he deliver on these promises, and what are the other challenges facing his new government? Well, resettling thousands of internally displaced people remains the country's largest post-war and election challenge. An estimated 280,000 still remain in internment camps as a result of the conflict. The government may also need to address criticism by the United Nations and the LTTE for alleged ill treatment of the displaced and of human rights abuses and crimes committed by the military during the conflict. Sri Lanka's position in the annual Corruption Perception Index has worsened in 2009, dropping from 92nd position to 97th position amongst the 180 countries. There is poverty throughout the country, especially in the Tamil minority. The government will have to work towards winning hearts and minds of the Tamil people after the defeat of the LTTE. Mr. Thea Idekada, does the apparent re-election of the incumbent president, Mr. Rajapaksa, mean really that a line has been drawn now under the issue of civil war, and the country can really look forward to its future as long as all parties work together?
Well, going by what you said, the first thing is that you could consider the Tamil areas of voting was very, very low. And of those people who actually voted, it's only about 2/3 opposed the president. So the implication is that the start with the Sri Lankan Tamils couldn't care less who won the election. That's why they didn't vote, and there was obviously a threat by a few bombs, and there was also lack of transport, people to travel around. Now, having said that, looking at the results, I have to come to the conclusion that Tamil people haven't accepted the president's victory. Secondly, you're talking about jobs, and in February, it looks very much that GSP Plus is going to be withdrawn by the European government, and that's going to damage the Sri Lankan economy enormously. And the main reason for that is human rights violations. So until he puts that, and then thirdly, he has pumped millions of pounds or maybe billions into arms, and all this money, arms are bought with the borrowed money. Sri Lanka is suffering with a huge debt burden.
There's a lot of issues that you're touching on that I want to touch individually within that. I do appreciate what you're saying. So let me just bring in Jonathan Spencer to put it into context for us, because as I think you can see from what Mr. EDINBURGH is saying, there's a mountain for President Rajapaksa to climb. Is the immediate importance for him to try and win over the Tamil minority in the north by making sure that major investment and development opportunities, health and education, really flood into that area to win those hearts and minds?
Well, I have to say, I think ideally that would indeed be the case, but if you actually look at the pattern of voting, such as it was in the Tamil areas, rather as in 2005, in his previous victory, Rajapaksa has won effectively on singular votes and not on the votes of the minorities. And so in terms of his own immediate political interests, there isn't any particular pressure on him to do anything in the north and the east. What there is, though, is there's a parliamentary election which has to be held before May, and his parliamentary majority is extremely vulnerable, and it's made up of a rather fragmented coalition of different parties and different interest groups, which has already been falling apart in the course of this campaign. So his immediate needs is to pull some kind of parliamentary majority together in the next election. And for that, he will indeed have to engage with Tamil political leaders and Tamil political parties, and that will be very interesting.
Mr. Ananth Palakidnar in Colombo, I presume some political manoeuvring, some political wisdom, some shrewd politicking is required now from Rajapaksa to make sure that he can now build on the presidential win and see success in parliamentary elections without alienating any smaller minorities, i.e. the Tamils, in the election.
Yeah, definitely, because this particular presidential election, if you take the north and the east, where the minority Tamils and the Muslims they domiciled, and the upcountry Tamils in the upcountry areas, there we have seen a lot of votes. It has gone against President Mahinda Rajapaksa, particularly in the northern and the eastern regions. Now here again the Tamil National Alliance, which was earlier sort of considered as the proxies of the LTT. So they have now their campaign had worked a lot in those areas. So now this is a prelude to the parliamentary elections. So we can see that TNA will definitely win more seats in the north and the east when there's parliamentary elections. So now this is high time for President Mahinda Rajapaksa to negotiate with the TNA and to see that politically he is sort of establishing himself in the north and the east to go ahead with whatever the political thinking with regard to the north and east issues. So it is very vital now. He has to think a new strategy to work with the parties, the dominant parties in the north and the east. So now it is, whereas the people have proved that they are behind the TNA campaign and the north and the east. So I believe that President has to work out a new plan and new strategy to see that he is winning the hearts and minds of the minorities in the north and the east.
Well, I think the debates over the election will continue there. Of course, Mr. Palakidnar, Mr. EDINBURGH, would you agree with that now, as the Foreign Minister said, the government has to be magnanimous, as does the President, and the President himself now has to build on this presidential win and move forward for the elections. Would you agree with what you've just heard from Colombo?
Yes, I do agree that the President has to be magnanimous on this issue. Even though the Tamils voted against him, he got to take it with a broad shoulder. But the huge issue for the Tamils is going to whether the TNA is going to win a high number of seats in the Sri Lankan parliamentary elections. Now, talking to a lot of people in Britain, a lot of people are not very happy with TNA because they took the side of SARATH FONSEKA. They have the view these both are evils. They should have never came out with one side or another. They should have played a neutral role. But I do not know what the people in Northern East are thinking, because in the election the turnout was very low, something like 18%. How the other 18% is thinking is no way of knowing it. That's going to make a huge difference. It all depends how the government is going to play the cards, what concession they are going to make to Sri Lankan Tamils, what facilities they are going to make it, what efforts they are going to make to win the hearts and minds of Tamil people. That is entirely in the hands of the current president.
Always going to be a difficult one.
Difference.
Yeah, I'd agree that always going to be a very difficult one. I mean, Jonathan Spence, I suppose it was a fait accompli for most of the electorate, because they had two men there primarily for the presidential vote, both of whom had together cracked down on the Tamil separatists up in the north. And perhaps Tamils might feel they had very little choice in this particular election. How do you think that might play out in the parliamentary elections that are forthcoming?
Yeah. Well, if the reports that I've heard are at all accurate, and obviously the picture is rather cloudy, it's not simply a matter that Tamils didn't vote, that the participation rate in the east of the country was actually relatively high, certainly much, much higher than in Jaffna. And of course this is an area which the LTTE lost 2 or 3 years ago. There's been a period of some kind of devolution or attempted devolution, or not very successful devolution there. But what you can see there is at much higher levels of participation. They did vote. They voted against Rajapaksa, suggesting that new kinds of alliances, new kinds of political formations are emerging, at least in some Tamil areas. Whether it's the TNA or whether it's going to be other kinds of groups that come to the front, we don't know. But it'd be reasonable to assume that over the next couple of years, similar things will happen in Jaffna too.
Certainly heading into the dark over certainly the next few weeks. Let's just take a quick look at the economy of the country, because the economy of the country did take a battering from the civil war and the recent global downturn. Now, to get Sri Lanka back on its feet, it's got to start doing what it does best, and that's working on the 4 T's. That's the letter T: tourists, tobacco, tea, textiles. All areas were hit, but agriculture accounts for over 1/3 of the employment opportunities for the population, with tea and tobacco plantations accounting for over 500,000 employees directly. Now, much of this land is up in the north. The economy is perhaps one of the indicators, one of the areas that, of course, allows people to feel franchised rather than disenfranchised if they feel they're being able to participate within the economy of the country. How vital is it to kickstart the economy, certainly in the north, Mr. EDINBURGH, for certainly the Tamil community, who have been, you might say, the victims of the last 3 decades?
Absolutely, they are. The important thing is that for any government in power, incumbent government, that the people should have the feel-good factor. Without the feel-good factor, anywhere in the world, the governments will lose the power. There is no way out of it. So simply saying, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Politicians can say anything they want in Asian countries. Now, how much they are going to actually do that? Rajapaksa hasn't got that much time now, given that parliament elections are in April or May. It's only 2 or 3 months. He needs to achieve a lot, and during these elections, well, there was some sort of an agreement with Mr. FONSEKA, but it was never revealed what that sort of agreement was. And it's about time for Mr. Rajapaksa to come out with a solution to the Tamil problem and use his political skills and make the people to accept that. End of the day, whatever said and done from Tamil diaspora, is the people in Sri Lanka, living in Sri Lanka, they had to make the decision. and they will only judge by the results, not by the empty talk. As you know that in the past, so many agreements were made with various governments, and even before the ink is dry, they were torn out and put in the bin. So they're not going to go by the words, they will go by the deeds.
Jonathan Spencer, I mean, how important is it really to kickstart the economy up in the north of the country? I mean, you give a man a job, a home, hope for the future, health, education. It's going to perhaps stop him even thinking about picking up a gun.
Well, yes, indeed, that's the case, and there's potentially a huge amount of untapped human resources, especially in the north, where education levels have been very high, which can make a big difference to the economy. And there's also potentially a large amount of external aid and support for reconstruction in the war-affected areas. The big contradiction that's held that back up till now, though, has been between the government's desire to control and micromanage all the flows of resources to all parts of the country versus the local people's desire to have local resources in the hands of local politicians, local political bodies, and so on. And whether that can be balanced over the next few years remains to be seen. But without it, people won't necessarily feel that even the resources that are coming into their area are benefiting the people in the way that they should.
Ananth, Palakidnar, I mean, we saw during the final few months of the war that even when aid was coming in to try and help the Tamils, the government wanted to try and control things. We're still seeing, 300,000 Tamils in government-controlled camps where they get food that they can't really use. They're not getting very many fresh vegetables. We've been running a whole series of reports on their conditions here on Al Jazeera. I mean, how important now is it for the government to allow outside agencies in to do the work that the government can't do because they might be overstretched with their resources?
Yeah, always, soon after the war, these camps were created for the internally displaced people, and it was a very timely thing because it is because of those camps thousands of lives were saved. So now gradually the government has worked out some plans to resettle these people, and the resettlement process is currently going on.
Do you think they're genuine in that, though? Do you think they're genuine in that, though? Because during, for example, the election, there were many reports up in the north that some Tamils couldn't vote because they couldn't get to voting booths.
Yeah, there were certain small hindrances for there were some small obstacles, but compared to previous elections, but this time there was no big incident as such because the people were free to vote for whoever the candidates they prefer. And earlier, in the past 30 years, we can see there were uncontrolled areas, cleared areas and uncleared areas. And the uncleared areas were controlled by the LTT, and the cleared areas were under the government troops. So these sort of problems were there. Now this year there was no problem as such, so all the people are free to move around and vote, and they were happily moving on. Maybe there may be a less percentage of votage, but overall situation this time, no bombing or no incidents or no any other big incidents as such. There can be small explosion as such, sure. But compared to previous years, there are people very peacefully and very calmly they cast their vote. Yeah.
Well, we'll see if in the next few months the situation gets any better or worse for the people up in the north of the country, and I'm sure we'll get you all back on the programme. That's about as much time as we have for this edition of Inside Story. To my guests in Colombo, London and Edinburgh, thank you for your time. And thank you for your time and joining me on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sahil Rahman. Thanks very much for your time and your company. Bye for now.